So we'll get the interview started. Welcome.
Alright.
Yeah, just before we get rolling, can you please introduce yourself, your name, degree, and what year you're in?
Yep, so hi everyone. I'm Emily Boxall. I'm doing a Master of Philosophy. So it's essentially a higher degree research degree. HDR, higher degree by research, I think is the term. And I'm in my second year.
What is your favorite venue on USU venue on campus?
Venue or space?
Can be either one.
Because I really like some of the kind of like, so there's a HDR space that's got like vaulted ceilings and stuff. So I quite like going there, except it's a bit noisy because it's next to Parramatta Road. But certainly the Great Hall has some gravitas to it, and the Courtyard Cafe has a very nice vibe. I find sometimes it seems like a bit of an oasis at times, which is quite good. So
yeah. Why are you running for board?
Well, I really like being part of a community, and I find it's important to give, like, not give back to the community in the sense that like there's a quid pro quo, but I think it's important to be an active member of the community, to be involved and to be engaged, and certainly, like, I'm extremely passionate about helping people and trying to make university a nice place to be, and for some people it is a space to kind of just move through. You get your degree, you go on to get a job and so forth, but for a lot of people I think it's a very formative time, and it's also an opportunity to meet different people and to be exposed to different ideas, and so I'm really excited to contribute to that, and I think the USU is a really valuable manifestation of how I kind of see the university, because the clubs allow people to come together and support one another, and I want to try and provide a similar level of support, but from the board, so try and help people help each other.
For the next question, so can you give us your top 3 policies that you have?
So one of them is, I think one of the challenges I've seen is that the USU doesn't have a lot of postgraduate representation on the board. I think there's a number of reasons for that. Partly a lot of the degrees are 2-year degrees as opposed to longer, and so it's difficult to kind of get a foot in, but also there's different, like, there's certainly a lot of issues that face both undergraduates and postgraduate students, cost of living, issues with higher education, like they're universal, but I think postgraduates sometimes have a different experience to undergraduates, and having that representation is really important. So that's one. But also I think, then the other 2 policies are introducing no interest loans through the the USU, so providing another avenue to provide financial support to students. I see this as a really capable thing. If I'm honest, I've actually emailed the current president and CEO essentially saying, look, even if I'm not elected, I'm happy to see this through, because I think it's quite achievable, and I think there's a lot of benefit that will come from arguably not a complicated process. And then the final one is increasing transparency of how the funding that goes to clubs and societies is demonstrated. So I've had a look at the financial reports for the USU, and it's very difficult to discern how much money from the USU goes into clubs and societies, and so being able to demonstrate that there is actual benefit being provided to that space, and I think kind of owning that, whether it's good or bad. I think that's the problem with it not being easily transparent, is there's no way to make a value judgment, and so you're left kind of in an information vacuum. And so, as I'm sure everyone knows, in a university, people don't like making decisions without information. It's kind of the whole point of being here, is to find answers, and so being able to demonstrate that and then allow people to decide whether that's a suitable amount of money or should be more or less, or however it should be, allows people to make that decision on their own.
I guess it kind of leads me on to my next question. So, out of those three policies that you just named, can you pick one of those and tell us, I guess, how did you come up with it? Was it your idea, or did you consult anyone or talk to anyone before deciding that this was a priority of yours?
Well, let's take the no interest loans. So, I mean, it's not my idea. The university provides some no interest loans already through bursaries and other schemes and their scholarships and certainly and the like, and they have conditions attached to them and whatever. One of the charities that I currently sit on the board of is the Hills Community Aid, who does a number of programs like homelessness, domestic violence, emergency relief, and the list goes on. But more to the point, they also provide financial inclusion services, and that is no interest loans for people who need them for day-to-day needs, particularly for things like, a good example that I've heard is someone needed new tyres for their car, or their car to be registered because they work from their car. You know, they have to drive their car either to work or for work, and they didn't have the money, and so they got a no interest loan through the Hills Community Aid to get the new tyres put on their car and the registration paid, and so they were able to provide for themselves. So a lot of people don't need, you know, I think it's very cliche to say, but you know, they don't need a handout, they want a hand up, to kind of get them back on their feet. And oftentimes it's not, you know, it's not a lot, it's just, it's very difficult, you know, when you find yourself falling short. And so, yeah, I won't take credit for that idea, but I think the value is that I've seen the ability to map that program to the USU, and certainly I think it's perfectly achievable to deliver. And certainly if I get elected, I'll be advocating strongly for providing that program because I can see a path to implementing it certainly within the 2-year term, and hopefully as soon as humanly possible. As to whether I've spoken to anyone or not, certainly I've mentioned it to a few people and they thought it was, I mean, quite a good idea. But more to the point, I don't think you need to speak to people to listen to what they're saying. You know, I think a lot of people think you need to, you need to do a lot of work to understand what the problems are. But if you just listen to, you know, what's happening in the media at the moment, certainly the conversations around campus, cost of living is obviously challenging everyone, and students are no exception. If anything, they're more hard hit than most, and so being able to provide a service like this, I think, would go a significant way to providing students with a safety net, some relief, and ultimately, like, the biggest challenge with financial inclusion is just the stress. You know, oftentimes it's whether you're going to have the money or not, as opposed to paying for it. And so being able to provide some comfort to people, I think, you know, takes that pressure off and allows them to actually go from, you know, just keeping their head above water to running. So I think it would go a longer way than just simply paying a bill.
Moving on from like policy questions, could you please describe your politics without using the word left wing, right wing, progressive, or independent?
I think that's a difficult question to answer because I don't know what you mean. Like saying, oh, politics, you know, it becomes very derivative. I think initially, like, do you want me to give you an opinion on policies? Do you want me to give you an opinion on, you know, and certainly I think, you know, I think that the challenge with what you've just described as well is it tries to bring politics down to, you know, one dimension. You know, are you left, are you right? And I think a lot of people have, and certainly I think it's where there's been a lot of challenges in elections lately, is that people are not one-dimensional. They don't have one particular interest.
Yeah, to specify, your personal politics, is that easier to talk about without using like where do I slot in right wing, left wing? Your personal politics, I guess your beliefs and values.
Yeah, beliefs and values are probably easier to talk about than politics. You know, I think maybe I'll talk about, so I like to approach everyone with an open mind. I think oftentimes people presuppose politics as a really easy example, but also, you know, whether someone's going to be receptive to you, or you know, or inviting, or what have you. And so for me, when I speak to people, and I really like doing it at the university, I find you know, you need to come in with an open mind to have a conversation with someone so that you can learn from them and you can listen to them. You know, you learn nothing from talking and everything from listening, because no new information comes in. But also, if you assume that people are, you know, negative to you, for an example, then you're self-limiting in my mind. You know, if you think that other people are going to respond negatively to you, then you said, I'm not going to engage in that situation. And it's not because someone has said something to you, it's because you've kind of held yourself back. And so I generally see that for what it is and go like, this is me presupposing a situation. So rather than like making like myself, like holding myself back, I kind of take a very open mind to it. With that all said, you know, like it's easy to talk about in the comfort of, you know, a locked room, like we're in a, you know, a meeting room, and so, you know, the real world is quite different to that, and certainly there are needs to be concerned for one's safety. You know, and the list goes on. Like there's been reports in the media recently about international students being like physically attacked, like assaulted, and that's not okay, and there are always going to be people, and that's only a recent one. Like I mean, you know, there's always people that are bad actors and bad faith actors, and so you do, like, unfortunately the world is complicated and you do need to be mindful of how you carry yourself in the world, but I think it's about balancing that risk, and providing a space where people don't feel as though that's their default. Because I think when people feel that they're not welcome, they either withdraw or they become resistant, and then it's very difficult to create a space where people can, you know, can connect.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on, so I guess onto around maybe the same point. Do you think the USU should be more political or less political?
Look, I mean, I would say that the USU is a reflection of the students. In the name, it's the University City Union Force, like it's for students, and so there's a need to reflect the beliefs of its members, and certainly to advocate on the behalf of its members. And for example, I've done a lot of work with Scouts Australia. I've been on their board, and they would describe themselves as apolitical. And I think the challenge with that is people sometimes say, oh, we don't get into politics. And I think that the problem is that there are issues that face, for example, Scouts Australia, that are in the political domain. Same as the university. You know, there's talks about international student caps, domestic student caps, you know, support services available for students. And I think when you use the term apolitical, it's not to say that you are not engaged in politics, it's to say that you're not politically aligned, and you advocate for issues that do come into the political sphere that affect your members. And so I don't think it's, and unfortunately I think the challenge with saying more political or less political is that politics is a multiple party system, whereas the USU is a single group. You know, if say, just to take it easily, you know, Labor and Liberal, if how politics was mapped, like how politics works was mapped to the USU board, there's not the concept of like an opposition. You know, everyone's trying to work for everyone, and so there's a need to focus on what those issues are.
Yeah. Recently, in the previous board meetings over the past few months, BDS has been quite a sustained topic over those meetings. The current board has declined to adopt BDS. If elected, would you support the USU integrating it?
Yeah, and to clarify, BDS as in boycott, divest, and sanctioning for certain companies, specifically from a viewpoint of the Israel-Palestine situation. Yes.
So look, I think I would say that the USU is a small part of the University of Sydney, and so I think it's important to look at it holistically. And like the University of Sydney is big, but it's also not like, on the scale of Australia that big as well. But it's important to make a meaningful change. So, just as an example, there are multiple conflicts. Like, so as you said, there's Israel and Palestine, but there's also issues with there's still the Ukraine and Russia war at the moment. There's also unrest in Africa, and so there's multiple situations. Like there's multiple situations across the globe that people's rights and liberties are being affected, and people live in constant fear of war or civil unrest. With that said, focusing on specific businesses, I think it's important to look at how do we make meaningful impact. So I can't speak to anything specific, but I would say that irrespective of what the USU does, it's important to take those actions individually. Like, for example, I avoid pubs and clubs as best I can because I don't believe in supporting companies that have poker machines. Particularly in New South Wales, it's a huge issue as far as I'm concerned. And it also stifles small businesses that can't cross-subsidise, food and drinks with poker revenue. So, I take that small action where I can. Now, I'm only one person, but it's an important thing for me. With that said, I think it's important that the USU has policies around like modern slavery and who it associates and partners with. And so if there's a need to consider, supply chains, so where that money is coming from, where that money is going to, then certainly, I'm not opposed to being conflict-free, but I think it's just important to understand, have that meaningful connection to avoiding that conflict. And certainly I think it's valuable for the membership to make clear, so the USU members to be clear, where our money goes, where our money comes from, who we do business with, and that's irrespective of what was it, the B?
Boycott.
Yeah, and the other letters.
Boycott,
divest,
divest,
and
sanction.
Yes.
And so I think the USU would mainly be looking at divesting or boycotting sponsorships or stuff like that, which leads to our next question.
Yeah, so I guess, in one of the meetings, board meetings recently, an SRC councillor asked whether Coca-Cola's Welcome Fest activation was a paid sponsorship. The USU said that it was, and that commercial arrangements are not disclosed. So I guess, should USU sponsorship arrangements be publicly disclosed to members?
Look, I think there's a need to be practical about it because obviously, businesses have lots of partnerships, and so it's not always practical to make clear everything. But that's not to say that it's not possible. You think about how online advertisement works. If you watch any social media, most people say it's a paid sponsorship. So to some extent, there's no harm in that. It's been demonstrated. And I guess further to that, I think there's also a need to consider, the value of certain partnerships and what they aspire to. Certainly with the work that I've done in the youth development space, there's questions around partnering with certain businesses and the like for the benefits of children. So for example, right, not that this is a hypothetical, but you wouldn't partner with a social media platform to advertise to children now because to support a children's development program because of the social media ban and the political climate. It's the same reason why you can't advertise fast food to kids on TV.
I guess on to a more hypothetical question. I guess, for example, you get elected and how comfortable would you be, let's say, publicly or just disagreeing with one of the board execs, or a fellow board director? Can you like walk me through how you would handle a moment where you think someone is wrong on a certain issue?
So I think this is really challenging because in broad strokes, the board of directors is a single entity. So as a board director, if I disagreed with another director, it would have to be done in a board meeting. But then as a board, we would all have to, like if there was a decision made, as a board, we would all have to publicly support that decision. And there's really only two options at that point. You either agree with that decision publicly or you resign. And the reason for that is because if you don't do that, you're not meeting your obligations as a board director to act in the best interest of the USU in this instance. And so it's not possible, like you shouldn't be, if you disagree so strongly with the decision that was made that you would speak out against it publicly, then how are you serving the best interests of the board?
Yeah. And I guess on that, can you name one thing that you're critical about on how the USU currently operates?
So as I said, one of my key platforms is the transparency of the finances, particularly how the money is allocated to clubs and societies. While the USU meets its reporting obligations under, financial management and like financial reporting duties, those reports serve a specific purpose, which is to account for all of the money that has been received being acquitted either for expenses or as assets or liabilities. That doesn't necessarily mean it meets the membership's expectation of how clear it is in those allocations of funding. So, it will just say like revenue or expenditure, like it breaks it down a little bit, but there's kind of specific categories, but it doesn't make clear how that money is allocated and to whom. And so my view would be, and I guess, critical, is to increase that transparency so that the members have a comfort level, like either the members are comfortable with the level of financing, or if they're not, they have a clear understanding of where they're not. Because for me, if I was to be so lucky as to be a board director of the USU, I would be listening to the members. And if they're saying you're not meeting our expectations, then there's an obligation on me to manage those expectations and to provide greater certainty.
So I guess, if elected, which portfolio or committees would you prefer to take on?
Look, it's hard to say, and I understand the question, but I'm open to any of the portfolios, and the reason I say that is because it's necessary to balance the allocation of portfolios with who are the directors, and obviously we don't know that. So someone might have a specific skill in which they're capable of. Certainly, my background is in, clubs and like charities. So at Scouts Australia, when I was on the board, I think we managed 2,000 clubs or like local groups over all of Australia. Now I worked at the national level down to the states, and the states manage people directly, but there's obviously a need to make sure that services are going all the way to the local level. But I've also done work in mental health. What else have I done? And certainly, as I said, with like the Hills Community Aid across providing outreach services. So for me, I would be happy to support people where they thought I would be best suited, but also, I want to provide other people the opportunity to take on portfolios where they would be, well fitted.
And I guess this just comes back to the point that you just made earlier. And usually it's like a question that everyone always asks, but like, how would you hold yourself accountable to the students who have voted for you?
Look, I think I clarify that by saying I'm not just accountable to the students that vote for me, I'm accountable to all students. if anything, I'm more accountable to the students that don't vote for me, but only because I have to demonstrate to them why I'm capable. You know, if they've chosen to vote for someone else and not me, then there's a gulf that I need to overcome. So there's a need to demonstrate the suitability there. But I think, you know, one of the biggest things is that it's very easy to talk in an election and it's very hard to listen. And so it's important, you know, should I be so lucky as to be elected as a board director of the USU, that I make myself available to students to listen to them. And so, you know, I would want to be able to create opportunities both where people could provide feedback, you know, online, but also in person. You know, I'd very much like to hear from people, because I only have, like, my lived experience is my perspective, but I can't be, you know, I'm not exposed to everyone else's.
Yeah, so just moving on from that, I guess, a bit of a more specific question. So you ran for board last year and weren't elected. I guess what happened in that campaign from your perspective, and what have you learned from it running again for this year?
So to some extent, I think I used that as an opportunity to understand the process. There were a number of other things that made it difficult for me. I'd had other commitments at the time, and certainly I think there was poor communication. So, for example, I wasn't able to participate in the soapbox, even though I was under the impression that I could remotely, but it's not really worth kind of, you know, picking those issues, especially in the moment. Like, you just have to play it as it lies. And then I also, I broke my finger, which made that essentially for, I think, the entire election week I was going to the doctor to get that diagnosed. So it made it quite difficult to mount a material campaign. But with that said, you know, I think there's a saying that you learn more from your failures than your successes. And I'd hope that I've demonstrated in the last 12 months that even without being elected, that I've been able to provide support to the USU through means other than on the board. And certainly I'd hope that the actions that I've taken in the last 12 months have hopefully demonstrated that to some people.
Yeah. And also last year, you didn't do the ONI candidate interview.
Yeah.
We're just wondering what changed this year and why are you doing it this time?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was never contacted. No one ever spoke to me, which made it very difficult to participate. So, and it wasn't until I think very late in the piece that someone even mentioned that, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was like, oh, if I knew someone had asked.
Yeah. I guess lastly on that point, so looking at the current board over the past year.
As an aside, was it you that sent the email about like the follow-up email to everyone about?
Yes.
Yeah. So if it wasn't for that email, I was very much on the fence, because I was like, last time the write-up was not particularly favourable, and I was like, no one ever spoke to me, and so the fact that you said like, oh, you know, we're wanting to be quite you know, collaborative, I was like, oh, okay. You know, so yeah, you know, and I think that demonstrates, you know, for me, the same experience I think a lot of other students have, which is that there's not a distrust, but there's, you know, it shows how a little bit of effort sometimes goes a long way in reaching out to people.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess on that, looking at the current board over the past year, has anything that they have done or failed to do kind of shaped your platform for this year?
Look, I think part of the challenge is it shouldn't go unsaid how significant incorporation is. It should, you know, there's been countless people that have said that they've been trying to do it and they just couldn't. And part of the problem with that is that the term limits mean that you've got to kind of pass the baton. And so unless there's considered effort over multiple boards, it doesn't happen. So, you know, you kind of stand on the shoulders of giants to some extent. So I think it's not, it should be understandable that that's been a key focus, because getting it across that line has been quite the achievement. I think it's very important now to having achieved is the wrong word, but having incorporated now working on that as the new foundation.
Mhm.
And so I'd like to see, you know, our focus should always be on our members as USU. So if I was a member of the board, I would be always bringing back to the question, you know, is this decision the best decision for our members? And if I'm not clear on that, then I need to answer that question for myself before I can feasibly go to someone and give them that answer.
And kind of moving on from that, so which other candidates, so you're probably already aware that like there will be 5 of you elected,
Mm-hmm.
and let's say, yeah, you get elected, so which other 4 candidates would you want to work with on the board and why?
Look, I mean, my comment would be that I couldn't say, and the reason is because to some extent, like, yeah, there's 11 people running for board, and I would hope that including myself, and of the other people, that all 10 of them are suitable for board, and so it's just a question of, you know, who do you think is going to represent the best values? But once the election is done, whoever those 5 candidates are, not only do they have to work with one another, but they also have to work with the 6 board directors that were elected last year, the 2 Senate directors, and the outgoing or the immediate past president. So to say that, you know, who do I want to work with? Well, the answer is I need to work with whoever gets elected. You know, it's not my choice to say, you know, who I will work with and who I won't, because if I'm elected, I have to.
Yeah. And then kind of leading on to that, so who do you see is your strongest competition in this race?
Well, I think again, you know, there's 11 people running for 5 places, so, you know, to think that only some of them are competitive is again naive, you know, and I think to have that mindset is only doing me a disservice in the election, but also discrediting the skills and abilities of people that, you know, are probably going to, you know, be quite, like, you know, everyone's competitive because I would hope that everyone who's running would want to be elected.
Yeah.
So
I think that should be all the, I guess, difficult or whatever questions it might be, but this is now the, I guess, chiller part of the interview. So
with the air conditioning, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Can you please tell us what your slogan is?
So there's really 2, but I think the main one is check the box for Boxall. So everyone needs to get out and vote. That's the only way you win an election. And certainly, you know, there's certainly like a need to get like more students engaged in student elections, but also that we're better together. So, you know, my focus is on trying to provide a space for all students to come together, and I think the USU does a really good job of that, but to maintain that and to grow that.
Yeah. And what is your campaign color?
Oh, colour?
Yeah.
Cyan, so it's like blue, green. I spent a lot of time trying to work out what the actual print colour was, and I was like, if anyone knows like printing, it's like the CMYK, and C is cyan. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense that it's 100% cyan and nothing else.
Can you please tell us who your campaign manager is?
Me. Like, I'm running my own campaign.
Yeah. Your favorite drink to get on campus?
I've had a big problem with soft drink in the past. So my grandparents used to have like soft drink in the fridge all the time, and so I do try and skew towards sparkling water because it's like a midpoint.
Close enough.
Yeah, it's like all the fun of drinking a soft drink with none of the calories.
Yeah. And lastly, before we wrap up, what is your green flag and what is your red flag?
Ooh, I think I'm really endeared by people who, you know, go out of their way and remember me. So, you know, like occasionally someone will come up and say something really nice to me, and, you know, it doesn't take a lot of effort, but it means a lot and it's nice. But so it's nice for me when someone says something nice and when they didn't have to. So I'm always endeared by that. So that's always a really nice green flag. Red flag is always you do kind of get a vibe for people. But certainly I think jumping to conclusions is always difficult, because it's like, how do you if people aren't willing to listen, then I don't think they're able to kind of have a conversation. So because it's like the real world is not never black and white. There's always like lots of colors, and so when you're trying to understand issues, to just assume that it falls into like either one line or the other, I think closes off your mind to all of the connected issues and then how everything fits together. So I don't know that it's a red flag as such, but it's certainly like how I kind of see the world, and so I try and I try to look and listen and take people on. So yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't rule someone out just off like the cuff, I think is the short version.
Yeah, that should be all. Thank you.